next speaker is somebody who doesn't really like to boast, because I was trying to explain and discuss why the next speaker is so relevant for us. But Geoffrey Goodell is from University College London. He just humbly calls himself a researcher at UCL London, but he really is one of the leading thinkers in the space. He's going to give a talk about 2 P's. Actually, I'm going to talk about a whole lot of stuff, but the 2 P's are payments and privacy. Geoffrey Goodell.
All right, so we've had some speakers bring up a number of different aspects of the Libra project, including questions of whether Libra is about central banks.
Yeah, I'm tethered.
Much better. Thank you very much. Whether Libra is about central banks, whether Libra is about monetary policy, whether Libra is about improving correspondent banking or is a natural evolution of correspondent banking, or whether Libra might be an evolution of payment networks, such as an evolution of PayPal or an evolution of SWIFT. Tonight, I'm going to encourage you to put that aside momentarily and consider that Libra might be an extension of the data harvesting and data brokerage business instead. So in order to understand why this is so, let's start with cash. Now, cash is good. Cash is very democratic. I know that my money is as good as anyone else's. It's available to anyone who can possibly hold it, including everyone on the street who asks for it, as well as the wealthiest billionaires in the world. They can all have cash. They can all use cash. It is private. It is secure. And most importantly, it is owned and controlled by the people who hold it. Now, that's not what modern retail banking is about. And I'm sure that many of you have pockets that have cards in them, payment cards, debit cards, credit cards. Some of them might be contactless. Some of them might be on devices. They might go by names like Apple Pay or Alipay or these kinds of things. And all of these systems are interesting because they're not like cash at all. When you hold money in these systems, the money is not actually yours. It is held by the institutions that happen to control the cards and the devices that hold this money, the accounts. There are accounts which are relationships between you and institutions, and the institutions direct the flow of money. Institutions, which include not only banks, but also custodians, also payment networks, card payment networks such as Visa, MasterCard, etc. We know who they are. And we know that card payment networks take a fee. Now, whether it's a fee that's experienced by the buyer versus the seller of the good, really has to do with the elasticity of their price functions, their cost functions on both sides. But it's a tax either way. The reality is they take a cut, and we know that they also ask for permission to transact as well. So what do I mean by that? Well, maybe some of you have taken a flight to a place like, I don't know, Frankfurt or Milan, and suddenly you want to use your card. And because you hadn't told your bank in advance that you were going to Frankfurt or Milan, they might say no. Or more precisely, Visa or MasterCard might say no. And it's important to think about Visa and MasterCard, these companies who were asking for permission every time you spend money, why they take a cut and why they can ask for permission. And it's not just that, it's that they also collect the data. They see every transaction that we do, every place we visit, our associations, our habits, when we get a job, when we lose a job, when we get a bonus, when we're home, when we're away. They know it all. This is very interesting. So why would people move from cash to this? Which brings me to the discussion of cryptocurrencies. And I'm going to argue that cryptocurrencies are really about privacy. And it's privacy in 2 forms. First, it's privacy about data protection, and I just mentioned data, and we'll get back to that in a moment. And second, it's about disintermediation. It's about being able to transact while holding your money and actually having it be yours. And we know that cryptocurrencies are about electronic digital cash because we can go back in time and see the history of digital cash and how that history leads right to the current age of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and what have you. 1982, David Chown wrote a paper, which many of you may have read, or some of you may have read. It is called Blind Signatures for Untraceable Payments. This was a novel innovation that was intended to create accountless digital cash, which was really the goal of cryptocurrencies just 27 years earlier. Now, what happened to accountless digital cash? Well, it wasn't decentralized. We didn't have distributed ledgers that were used in this way back then. So there were a number of efforts to try to capitalize on this idea that people wanted accountless digital cash to make payments online. Some of you may have heard DigiCash, eGold, Liberty Reserve, all of these companies that existed in the late 80s, early 90s, early aughts. And all of these companies came and went, all of these efforts came and went. Many of them were shut down because of concerns not about monetary policy, not about threats to banks, but about privacy. And as Ariel mentioned, criminals tend to be ahead of the curve on so many things and so many technologies for a lot of reasons. But people sometimes make the assumption that privacy creates criminality, and it doesn't. Privacy is something that is useful to everyone. And we must be careful when we design infrastructures not to generate infrastructures that put honest but perhaps less well-endowed people at a disadvantage relative to criminals and wealthy people. And that's precisely what we've come to do in modern retail payments when we have created this technology to harvest data on their transactions. Now let me be clear. What has happened with cryptocurrencies and what has happened with decentralization? Well, Bitcoin isn't really anonymous. Sarah Michael-John and a few others at UCL had demonstrated this a few years back. But we've seen that there are efforts to make cryptocurrencies more private. We know that there is Zcash. We know that there is Monero. We know that there is Mimblewimble, which is an attempt to retrofit Bitcoin with a more private way of transacting. But let's understand that this is about the data, and this is about escaping the gaze of the surveillance that can be conducted using your data and harvesting your data. This is a way to, cryptocurrencies are seen as a way to get away from that. In addition to a way to be disintermediated and a way to get away from the corresponding banking charges, etc. So it's both of those things. But let's talk about the data. So what is it that you get? Well, you know, there's no question that the model of harvesting electronic payments data is successful. Why do I say that? Well, that's what the challenger banks do. So look at the challenger banks as Citi did. Citi, the global bank, published a report several months ago, I think in March, that analyzed the ways that challenger banks can subsidize their businesses through data harvesting, and undercut the full-service banks in so doing. How do they do it? Well, many of these challenger banks in Citi's study established relationships with clients of data. So who are the clients? Well, let's think about it. Retail brokers like Alibaba were singled out. Credit organizations and other risk management firms that want to build profiles on people to provide negative incentives. You can't provide negative incentives without control and surveillance, and that's what's going on here. And they will buy, effectively, either the data or access to the fruits of the data from the challenger banks. Challenger banks establish relationships with them, harvesting the data, selling it to their clients effectively, and they're able to undercut the services of full-service banks. So this business model works, and it is being, it has been promoted and condoned by open banking and what we see with the ability for various firms who engage in data brokerage to enter the financial payments or remittances business. And this works. So that brings me to the next question, which is, well, why did Facebook get into this? And it seems that at this point we understand why already. There is a trove of information about individual persons that can be harvested the way that Facebook best knows how. Facebook doesn't need to link the transactions to Facebook profiles or WhatsApp profiles in order to benefit from the ability to harvest transactional data. These data are valuable to the clients of the existing data brokerage business in the financial payment space, which is a natural place for Facebook to go. Now, I was a fund manager for many years, and I can tell you that fund management and ETFs is not money shot here. I can tell you that Facebook looks like an advertising firm with a technology valuation, and it always has to prove its growth potential and its opportunity for entering new spaces, and it seemed that it was only a matter of time before it would enter this one. In 1975, a researcher at the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, California, described, he basically put it this way. If you want to design an unobtrusive and efficient surveillance system, you can't do any better than an electronic funds transfer system. Now, 20 years ago, the Visas and the MasterCards of the world didn't have the apparatus to actually exploit this to the extent that was necessary, but now we do. And I'd like to remind the audience that individual firms don't make money, supply chains make money. And if a client has an interest in data for various purposes, then that will be of value to whoever is building the infrastructure. And in this case, it's Facebook building the on-ramps into the Libra system through its Libra service, which will ultimately be an opportunity for Facebook to collect and harvest data in a systematic way, just as it always has done. So, we see that Facebook is doing what we would have expected, harvesting data, via a channel that we know works. Now, it might be that Facebook is facing a risk and they're forced to do this for various reasons, but it makes perfect sense. It is sound. So, what are we to do? And can we speculate for a bit on the future for a moment? Well, banks are being squeezed. Full service banks, make no mistake. They're being squeezed on both sides. They're being squeezed by regulators on the one side, on the one hand, who are waving the flag of very draconian surveillance as required by state governments, by nations, using a vehicle called FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which many of you have heard of, which basically has recommended that every electronic transaction of money must be associated with accounts held by regulated financial institutions. And every account must be associated with the unitary identity of a natural person. And every organization who supports such an account must be able to provide information to basically whatever government's ask them for in the context of their investigations. So we see that there's a strong regulatory interest in forcing banks to be policemen, something that banks have never wanted to do and has never been their core business. They're also forced, on the other hand, by this new phenomenon, by the data brokers who are able to undercut them in a relatively lucrative part of their business, payments, even though data harvesting is also not something that is their business. Now, granted, they have relationships with firms like Visa and MasterCard, who of course give the information to both credit bureaus and intelligence firms alike, not to mention the data breaches that allow them to give the data to every hacker who gets it. But also, these data brokers are making it harder for banks to continue to exist in their current business model, forcing banks to consider what their options are. And one of these options is to try to be like the data brokers, and indeed many banks have built initiatives in-house to try to figure out if they can harvest the data. Again, remember, supply chains make money, not individual businesses. So if you harvest the data through a startup that you have some association with, maybe that's the way to do it. I don't know. But I would like to suggest that if we care about human rights, we need a different solution. And I would like to speculate that this is the solution that sooner or later banks will reach in protecting and furthering their business model. And I might be wrong, but I hope I'm right. And this is it. The idea is that if we want to create regulations to protect people's privacy, it needs to be done as a public good, acknowledging that it's a public good. It needs to be done by regulators, because that's the only way to address these public action problems, these collective action problems. This is Garrett Hardin. And banks will want to work with regulators, or they will need to work with regulators to build regulated financial infrastructure that preserves the privacy of individual persons who are using the infrastructure to make remittances and payments. That's it. And this can happen if they work together, and it can happen if regulators acknowledge that this is a collective action problem that is about both national security and human rights, which it is, right? I mean, if we have the ability for individuals to manipulate populations cheaply and at scale, which is the proposition of data brokers, then it would be naive to think that this isn't a national security problem. So regulators will need to move on this, and banks will need to move with them. So we'll need to figure out how to build this kind of infrastructure and what it will look like. Libra is not a cryptocurrency in the classic sense. I mean, in the sense of being something like a Bitcoin. This isn't really what it's about. Now, what banks and regulators can build might be similar to Libra in this respect. But if we expect to protect the privacy of the people making the transactions, I would leave it with banks, not data harvesters. Because banks have a different business. That is to say, taking deposits, making investments. This is what banks have done for thousands of years. And it's not what data harvesters do. And that's it. Thank you.